Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's begin our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles. Along with this, I'll be bringing in some important facts and details from related PIB press releases as well. So this ensures a comprehensive coverage of the current affairs and you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you're looking to enroll into Unacademy's IAS classes, this would be the right opportunity as we are offering the lowest price ever. At just 16,999, you get a 12-month subscription with even 1 month free extension. This offer will end on the 31st of July, and after that the prices are set to increase to 24,999. So if you're looking to enroll for a guided structured program with classes from India's top educators along with the practice test, the study material and mentorship, then this would be the right program for you. So those of you who are interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description. On the subscription page you might see a different price, but to avail the discount you have to enter the code IAS English. So now let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 9, there's a detailed article on the topic of ethics and morality in international politics. It's a very interesting and insightful article which can be very helpful for the mains exam, not just for GS paper 2 under international relations, but even for a possible essay topic. This article proposes the idea that moral values, ethical considerations, principles, they still play an important role in guiding international relations and foreign policy. The writer is arguing that foreign policy is not just about protecting national interests, it goes beyond that. And no foreign policy can be devoid of its idealistic principles and roots, which provides that moral guidance to the foreign policy of a nation. So let's dive a little deep into this topic. I'll take you beyond the article as well, and let's analyze this topic in complete detail. Now, when you look at international relations is an academic discipline within the domain of political science. At the same time, international relations is practiced through foreign policy by engaging in foreign relations, where state actors and the concerned foreign policy establishments they maintain relations with other partners and engage in diplomacy, which is essentially international relations in practice. Now, be it in theory or in practice, international relations is often divided into two schools of thought: the idealist and the realist school of thought. The idealist school of thought believes that in foreign policy, in political relations, in international politics, there should be focus on ethics, values, morals, principles should be guiding the policy of the states. This is considered as idealist foreign policy. Whereas there is the realist school of thought, several thinkers believe that states have to focus just on their strategic calculations. They just have to focus on their interests, that is, their national interests, irrespective of the ethical and the value based outcomes. So, realist school of thought appears to be more cold hearted, meaning it turns the other way even when there is immense human suffering, and it might even perpetuate human suffering in the name of protecting one's national interests. So, states often pursue power and their strategic calculations through their foreign policy, and they often tend to ignore the ethical considerations and the moral guiding principles which are actually essential in any society. So when any state pursues a very pragmatic, a very practical foreign policy approach focused just on its core interests with no consideration for ethical moral considerations, with no consideration for the emotional impact that foreign policy can have on the people, such foreign policy is often rooted in realism, realist school of thought. So this is a very debatable topic as to what is the ideal foreign policy. Should it be rooted in realism? Should it be rooted in idealism? Or should it be a mix of both? Now, when you look at the current global order, the foundation of today's international order was primarily laid during the colonial period, primarily by European powers in the pre-war era. Then, the rules-based order that you have today was primarily championed by United States in the post-war period, because these were the leading powers of that time. Initially, it would be Britain, France, and other European colonial powers, which laid the very basis of international relations. But after Second World War, with the decline of the colonial powers and the emergence of United States as an economic and military might, as an economic and military powerhouse, the US took the lead to establish the current international order. Now, when you look at American scholars, American political thinkers, they were the ones who pioneered the realist school of thought, which is completely devoid of emotions. They championed the idea in the world of political science that a state should just focus on its economic interests, its security interests. And this can even come at the cost of causing immense suffering to other states. So, where the foreign policy establishment was being guided to look the other way and ignore the human consequences of foreign policy making. This has become the bedrock of American foreign policy. Since realism is what American universities, thinkers were propagating, and the American state, in its pursuit of power, blindly followed the realist approach, which was further propagated by media channels, later consumed by the American public and the American establishment itself. So, this today has become the norm. It has become acceptable to completely ignore the ethical and moral considerations and the emotional impact that foreign policy could have. So, humanitarian considerations have become secondary priority, whereas the state's interest in power, the state's interest in its strategic calculations, they are seen as of primary interest when it comes to foreign policy of any nation. In fact, even if you were to bring up the ethical, moral considerations or the emotional values, you often will get ridiculed by the critics and by the supporters of the state, because it's often believed that the state should pursue a very ruthless foreign policy in order to protect its core interests. But the writer here is providing examples, both from the recent past and from contemporary geopolitics, to illustrate how idealism can never be ignored. In fact, idealism continues to drive foreign policy even today. The writer argues that moral principles, ethical values, and the emotional impact of foreign policy, it still shapes international relations even today. So, for example, if you look at what happened in Iran in the ongoing conflict with Israel and United States, the assassination of Ayatollah al Khamenei, it has generated a massive emotional outrage, at least within a section of the Iranians. Yes, the supreme leader Ayatollah al Khamenei was leading a autocratic, theocratic regime, a radical conservative state where basic human rights, women rights were oppressed. But you can't ignore the fact that the Ayatollah is seen as the supreme leader within the Shia world, not just in Iran, but even beyond Iran, within the Shia world. Ayatollah holds that respectable position. So the grief which has been caused by his assassination by Israel and United States has managed to unite at least some of the Iranians, even those who were opposed to the theocratic state. And this creates the feeling of seeking retribution. This unifies the state and it strengthens Iran's fight against its arch enemies, that is, Israel and United States. And this could have a lasting impact that can last even years and decades beyond this current war. It could create a generational hatred that could further perpetuate enmity and hostility between Iran and the West. So, this again shows that emotional values like grief, empathy, love, fear, hatred, these are emotional aspects which are integral to any human being. which are integral to any society as well. So, any foreign policy outcomes which is driving up these emotions, raising ethical questions, moral values, and principles, they will continue to shape geopolitics, because now the killing of the Ayatollah creates that element of grief, empathy within the supporters, within the followers, and could push them to seek revenge and retribution against the West. And this could lead to a cycle of violence, a fresh wave of violence in the coming years and decades. See, today, US policymakers, they might ignore these considerations, but tomorrow, the very same nations will end up paying the price. When you look at how the global perception has changed with regard to Israel, this again is a clear sign that ethical values and moral principles, they continue to guide and influence foreign policy. You can't ignore that. Because see, on October 7th, 2023, when the deadly attack was carried out by Hamas, 1,000 plus Israelis were killed. The entire sympathy of the world was with Israel. The global community largely empathized with Israel. The global community understood the pain of the Israeli people and called out this dastardly attack by Hamas as a terrorist attack. You take India, for example. India has consistently maintained a balanced position on the Israel Palestine issue. We don't designate Hamas as a terrorist organization for this very purpose. But India still labeled the October 7th attack as a terrorist attack. India supported Israel's right to act in self defense. Many other countries as well. They called out this attack as a terrorist attack and they stood with Israel, supporting its right of self defense when it launched the war against Hamas. But look at how the narrative and the global opinion has shifted in the last 3 years. Today, Israel is accused of committing a genocide against Palestinians. It is accused of indulging in war crimes and crimes against humanity. Given the ruthless force that Israel has employed and the disproportionate force that the Israeli government and the Israeli defense forces have displayed, this has led to outrage across the world. Close to 65,000 to 70,000 Palestinians have been killed, with a large number of women, children, old people. And these actions can never be justified on any ground. Despite the October 7th attack, Israel gets no right to go and kill innocent people, civilians, and children. And this is something which is now being condemned widely across the world. And this global pressure acts against Israel. It does shape Israel's perception and opinion, and it pushes the whole world to have a different outlook towards Israel itself. This will push governments in turn to alter their foreign policy towards Israel. For example, when the attacks happened, the October 7th attacks, several European powers who have traditionally been Israeli allies, they stood with Israel and completely supported Israel's right to target Hamas. But today, look at how many European countries have turned against Israel. From Spain to even France, they have been openly critical of Netanyahu's policies and the controversial extremist approach that the Israeli state has been following and the disproportionate force that Israel has been using against Palestinians. Many European countries have gone ahead and even recognized Palestine. So this shows that the foreign policy of these European governments, they have been shaped by public opinion. Because across the world, large-scale anti-Israel protests have erupted. From India to US, from Europe to Australia. Around the world, the people who have been shocked by the brutality that Israeli forces have committed, it has led to large-scale mobilization, which brings political pressure on the respective governments. These domestic developments, driven by emotions, driven by values and principles, it brings pressure on governments to alter their foreign policy and in turn pressurize Israel. So you can't say that in foreign policy, national interests alone will matter, realism alone will matter. Idealism will equally matter as well. Whether you acknowledge it or not, value based foreign policy and consideration of ethical values and moral principles will continue to have an impact in foreign policy making. And these two examples perfectly illustrate that. Now, even when you look at the Cold War era, in the Cold War, the reason why United States was seen as a champion of the free world was because it projected itself as a defender of democracy, a defender of human rights, a defender of liberty. while projecting the Soviet Union as an oppressive authoritarian regime. In fact, the US even shaped global narrative to suit this particular this particular perception that the US was shaping. And that is what led the global community to largely rally with the US. Across the world, the general opinion, mostly in free societies, was to support the United States and whatever actions it took up during the Cold War as a necessity to protect democracy, human rights, and liberty against the authoritarian approach of communist states. So the US has benefited by focusing on ethical values, idealistic principles, because without that, American foreign policy would not have generated an element of global support and global sympathy against its rivalry with the Soviet Union and the communist bloc. Or look at the impact of globalization. It's primarily the Western powers which championed globalization, which pushed the advantages of an interconnected global economy. But today, globalization, though it has brought massive growth, it has even created large scale inequality. It has divided the world between haves and have nots, where the rich have become richer and the suffering of the poor has further increased. So, even now, globalization, free market principles, capitalist models, they get a lot of support across the world because people associate globalization with larger human development. So, without that ethical consideration and value based consideration, globalization probably would not have the similar support and sympathy. And the West doesn't face much criticism for the inequality it has perpetuated because there is this general assumption that globalization is good, free markets are good because it provides for rapid growth compared to any other model. While it is true that globalization has delivered significant growth, it has equally increased inequality. It has pushed inequality across the world, and the West shares a large share of the burden, as global South has not benefited that much from globalization. So, this narrative gets basically subsumed. The West will not take the blame for it. Why? Because people look at the good aspects of globalization, the good it brings with regard to its opportunities, etc. Without that, the West would be held directly responsible for the inequality it has perpetuated. So you can't say that foreign policy is devoid of ethical concerns and idealistic principles. Look at India's own experience. During the Cold War era, when India founded and championed the non aligned movement, when we led the third world, we were not just choosing to not take sides in the rivalry between the Western states and the communist Eastern Bloc. We were actually championing a neutral third ideology, carving out a middle path to bring stability in a divided world. Non aligned movement was rooted in ethical values and principles to prevent another global level conflict. It was rooted in the principles of the Panchashil, which is directly inspired by Buddhist philosophy. And when India championed the non aligned movement and got support within the global south, it was purely on idealistic lines. The global south nations, they rallied behind Prime Minister Nehru because of India's belief in its civilizational approach towards diplomacy, because of India's approach towards maintaining peaceful world order, because of how non aligned movement could actually bring some stability in a divided world order. Even if you look at the civilizational philosophy that India projects today through its foreign policy, the policy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, treating the whole world as one family. This is, again, purely idealistic. And India champions this vision, tapping into the civilizational ethos of India to project our soft power influence. And this helps shape our foreign policy and protect our national interests. So, foreign policy, it always doesn't require realistic, a cold-hearted approach. It can be shaped by the softer civilizational values, by ethical principles and moral considerations as well. Look at the support that India managed to gain during the liberation of Bangladesh in 1971. It was because of India's principled position on the humanitarian angle with regard to the atrocities Pakistani army was committing against Bengalis that we could shape the global narrative and opinion and gain much of the global sympathy and support for the war efforts. Even when United States was hostile, aligned with Pakistan, threatening India, much of the global support was in India's favor And that's because the Indira Gandhi government managed to prioritize the humanitarian angle in this conflict. If it was purely pursued as a realistic strategic approach, probably India would have never generated that support during the 1971 conflict. So these examples, they illustrate again and again that foreign policy cannot be devoid of emotions. It cannot be devoid of humanity. It cannot be devoid of ethical and moral considerations and principles. Because after all, foreign policy is all about managing people of different states, right? And eventually, what guides human values and principles will influence state relations as well. Yes, generally, states pursue power, they pursue cold hearted calculations, but any state that completely ignores the ethical moral considerations is bound to be doomed. That's why a good mix in any foreign policy is to have a combination of realistic and idealistic principles. And that's exactly how Indian foreign policy has evolved over the decades. Western powers, in particular, they have more relied on their strategic interests and national interests, driving a realistic approach. Even India, in some instances, has followed a very realistic, pragmatic path. For example, our ties with Taliban, our relations with Myanmar, they have been driven by pure hard logic. But at the same time, you see India championing values, ethics, and morals and principles that align with the goals of humanity. And that's what makes India's foreign policy quite unique. So, based on what we have discussed, please take up this mains practice question. Now, let's look at the next article. This column focuses on a new initiative of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the Tigers Outside Tiger Reserves Initiative, the TOTR initiative. Recently, the Environment Ministry has launched a conservation program to conserve and protect the tiger population that is found outside of the tiger reserves. So let's understand this article. Now, when you look at India's tiger population, today India is home to nearly 70% of the global tiger population. But just a couple of decades ago, the population of tigers in India was at an alarming level. We just had around 1,411 tigers in 2006. Many experts believed that tigers were on the verge of extinction in the country. But today, in a span of just 2 decades, the tiger population has jumped to 3,682 as of 2022. So this year, the next All India tiger estimation would be carried out, and most likely the numbers are likely to jump. So this remarkable improvement in tiger population is credited to one conservation program, that is Project Tiger, that was launched in 1973. Project Tiger has been pivotal in conserving and protecting the tiger habitats and to revive the tiger population in India. The program, it did lose focus in between. It was not effectively implemented in the 80s and 90s. But once it was revived in 2006, and once greater attention was paid to tiger conservation as a national priority, India has done remarkably well under Project Tiger to increase the tiger population in the country. See, when Project Tiger was launched, we barely had around 9 tiger reserves. They stretched around 18,000 square kilometers. Today, we have 58 tiger reserves, and they cover nearly 2.6% of India's land mass, stretching over 84,000 square kilometers. So, India has significantly expanded the protected areas, bringing them under the designation of tiger reserves and implementing conservation strategies. This has helped India to counter hunting and poaching of tigers, to protect the population, to protect the prey base, to manage man tiger conflict situations. And this cannot be done without involvement of state governments and the local communities. So it has been a very holistic approach that India has followed under Project Tiger, and the credit goes to all the stakeholders led by the NTCA, the National Tiger Conservation Authority. But today, due to the explosion in tiger population, we are facing a new challenge. Because see, tigers, like any other big cat, they are highly territorial. The moment a habitat reaches a certain saturation, tigers tend to move out of these habitats. They will venture out. And as a result, today, a lot of tigers are being found outside of these tiger reserves. According to studies, nearly 35 to 40% of our tiger population, they are currently living outside tiger reserves. Now, outside of these tiger reserves, the same degree of protection doesn't exist. They are venturing into reserved forests where human activity could be present. Human habitations will be present, nearby villages would be present. And this increases the chances of man animal conflict. As tigers venture outside of tiger reserves because of increasing competition, increasing territorial fights, they will move out of the protected areas and they will venture out into the buffer zones and beyond, into reserve forests and into the villages. So they'll start attacking the cattle, or they could attack even humans, right? And this results in increasing incidents of man animal conflict. And this poses a serious threat, not just to the local population, but it poses a serious threat for the tiger as well. Because generally, when man animal conflict incidents increase, there is a high chance that locals will try to take revenge against the tigers. And they might even try to kill those tigers. So, this represents a serious environmental risk and a conservation challenge. Today, we have 35 to 40% of the population living outside of these tiger habitats. So that's why the Environment Ministry has launched a brand new initiative. It's called TTOR, or TOTR, Tigers Outside Tiger Reserves Initiative. So let's understand what is the design of this program. How does it plan to protect these tigers that are found outside tiger reserves? What is the approach, the model being implemented by the Environment Ministry? Under TOTR, there are two major pillars under which this initiative is being driven by the Environment Ministry. The first pillar mainly focuses on reducing incidents of man animal conflict, containing the human tiger conflict situations, and if emergencies arise, responding quickly, immediately, to not just protect the human beings, but even to rescue the tigers and to rehabilitate them. So it focuses on strengthening the field measures, the early warning systems, local communication networks, and deploying quick response teams by working with forest departments and the local communities. The second pillar focuses on promoting long term coexistence. See, as tiger population continues to grow, it is a reality that we need to accept that tigers will more frequently venture into the outside areas located outside of the tiger reserves. They are likely to venture towards villages and the outskirts of the forest areas. So, for this, you need to sensitize the local communities. You have to train them, you have to prepare them, you have to make them aware as to how to handle such movement of tiger and how to coexist with the animal. See, traditionally, tribal communities, they had this traditional knowledge, this inherent knowledge as how to coexist with wild animals. And today, it has become necessary to bring back the traditional knowledge and imbibe this with the local communities. So, the second pillar mainly focuses on building coexistence, where tigers can coexist with some human habitations and minimizing the incidents of man animal conflict. If at all incidents occur, compensating the victims on time, ensuring that adequate community engagement is maintained, and treating the local communities as partners in this conservation program. They are not just victims of man animal conflict, but you should bring them on board as stakeholders, just like the State Forest Department, the Central Environment Ministry, and other institutions involved. Similarly, local community members, they should be brought on board as stakeholders as part of the conservation initiative. So these are the two pillars on which the TOTR initiative is being implemented. The state governments play a very important role in this regard, especially to make some strategic investments to train their workforce. The forest department officials would require better training. They would need access to better technology because technology can be a force multiplier when it comes to monitoring the tiger reserves and the tigers located outside the tiger reserves. So, by using GPS based tracking, by deploying camera traps, by using drones, and by using artificial intelligence to scan through the footage to detect any tiger presence and to continuously monitor the movement of these animals. So, technology can really help set up a early warning system through which timely alerts can be disseminated both to the forest department and as well as to the local communities so that they can take timely action. They can respond quickly with regard to any emergency situation where tiger attacks have been reported. They can play a quick role in saving lives and also protecting the tiger while capturing it and rehabilitating it. So these are the two pillars on which this system is being built. And there is a lot of focus on setting up early warning systems in areas surrounding the existing tiger reserves. So this program is designed to ensure that all the concerns are addressed, be it the concern of the local population with regard to damage to their um, cattle or attacks on humans where injuries and deaths could be reported. At the same time, addressing the environmental considerations to protect the tiger population and the habitats, ensuring adequate prey base. All these areas would be prioritized and these would be implemented specifically in the outside areas of tiger reserves, in the buffer zones, in the reserve forests, where these incidents are occurring. Now, according to the All India Tiger estimation that was done in 2022, the 2022 Tiger Census, tiger population was discovered in at least 212 forest divisions in the country. So this program is not being implemented across India. It is first being launched as a pilot project because, see, first you have to test how the project and the initiative would work on the ground, draw lessons, generate feedback, accordingly customize the initiative, and then roll it out across the country. So, right now, just 40 forest divisions have been selected where the TOTR initiative will be implemented. This will cover 9 tiger states, including Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Karnataka, Assam, and the others. 9 specific states have been chosen, 40 forest divisions, where the pilot project of TOTR is being rolled out. Once the lessons are learned, then it will be scaled up and implemented nationwide. So, this changes the approach towards tiger conservation from a reactive approach to a proactive approach, especially with regard to managing human tiger conflict situation. See, until now, whenever human tiger conflict situations arose, the forest department and the concerned authorities, they would just respond to the crisis that was developing. The focus was just on crisis management, which is after the incident has occurred. So that was a reactive approach. So now TOTR initiative will prioritize a proactive approach to prevent these incidents from happening with better early warning, better deployment of technology, inclusion of local communities, and better training of the forest department as well. So based on what we have covered, please take up this practice question. This can definitely be asked, be it in mains or even it could be a potential prelims question as well. Now, coming to the next topic, Iran's ongoing engagement with the Afghan Taliban. This article gives us a beautiful insight into how Iran is trying to engage the Afghan Taliban despite the historical rivalry and enmity that they share. See, when Taliban rose to prominence in Afghanistan in 1990s, it was mainly centered in Kandahar region, and 1994 is when the student-based radical organization was born out of the Afghan Mujahideen. Now, since then, Taliban was perceived as a threat by Iran, and especially after Taliban captured power in 1996 and formed an Islamic Emirate until 2001, until it was toppled by the US-led invasion following the 9/11 attacks. Taliban was perceived as a direct threat, a strategic and security threat by Iran. Why? Because Iran is a Shia state, whereas the Taliban is a radical Sunni organization, a political insurgent organization engaging in violent acts of terrorism, also sheltering terror groups such as Al Qaeda and the others. So, as a result of the ideological divide, Iran saw the rise of Taliban and the emergence of Taliban to power as a strategic threat. So, there was a time when Iran worked with other like minded countries to counter the Taliban and to even sponsor a covert proxy war aimed at weakening the Taliban's control in Afghanistan. This is a very interesting part of our history where Iran actually collaborated with India and other key partners, including Russia and few Central Asian countries. So these countries, which perceived the Taliban as a threat, they came together and they funded the northern tribes of Afghanistan, collectively known as the Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance emerged as a strong rival and an opposition for the Taliban. If the Taliban was mainly made up of Pashtuns, their Northern Alliance was mainly made up of Tajiks, Uzbeks, the Turks, and other northern tribes centered around the legendary Panjshir Valley in northern mountainous region of Afghanistan. Whereas the Taliban has always been centered around the Kandahar region, southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan. So while Taliban was a puppet of Pakistani deep state, controlled largely by the ISI and the Pakistani army establishment, the Northern Alliance in the Panjshir Valley received covert proxy support through the intelligence agencies of India, Iran, Russia, and Central Asian countries. See, for Russia as well, Taliban was a threat back in the 1990s. Why? Because Russia's predecessor, the Soviet Union, had invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and the Afghan Mujahideen, which was a Pashtun resistance, an armed insurgent resistance against Soviet occupation, had brought down the Soviet invasion of the country, and eventually Soviets had retreated. So the Taliban, which was a byproduct of Afghan Mujahideen, was a natural threat. Russia was worried about the spread of jihadist ideology towards Eurasia and Central Asia region. So even Central Asian countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and the others were equally concerned about the spread of radicalism and terrorism. So Russia, which still had deep influence in Central Asia, in countries like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, it allowed India to access its military bases like Aini Air Base and Farkor Air Base, which became a staging ground for India's raw research and analysis wing. So through these air bases in Central Asia, Aini and Farkor, India's research and analysis wing worked with Iranian intelligence, with Russian intelligence, to fund Ahmad Shah Massoud, the legendary leader of the Northern Alliance, also known as the Lion of the Panjshir Valley. So these countries gave funds, arms, intelligence support to prop up the Northern Alliance as a counter to the Taliban. So Iran was very much part of this alliance to work with Northern Alliance to bring down the Taliban and to counter the Taliban. But today, the very same Iran cannot afford to have hostility with the Taliban, which has come back to power since 2021. This time, Iran has been reaching out to Taliban, and even Taliban is trying to work with Iran. They're keeping aside their ideological rivalries, their mutual suspicion and distrust. Because please look at the map. Iran and Afghanistan share a very long border. Iran cannot afford a hostile neighbor. Similarly, Afghan Taliban, which is craving for recognition since 2021, cannot afford a hostile neighbor. So since 2021, Iran's approach has changed. It has been actively engaging with Taliban. In fact, it has even went ahead to build close ties with the Taliban leadership. But however, Iran has not recognized the Taliban regime. In fact, no country in the world has recognized the Taliban regime except for Russia. Just like how India is engaging with Taliban without recognizing the Taliban regime. Similarly, Iran is closely engaging the Taliban today. So just a few days ago, when the funeral was held for Ayatollah al-Khamenei, world leaders were invited by the Iranian government. Even India sent few senior representatives, right? Similarly, the Taliban leaders were present. Taliban's foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, and Taliban's deputy prime minister, they attended the funeral procession of the Ayatollah. What was interesting was Iran had invited leaders of Northern Alliance as well. The son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, who has taken over the Panjshir Valley region and the Northern Alliance, was also in attendance at the funeral ceremony. So this shows Iran's policy of engaging with all the stakeholders in Afghanistan. Iran realizes it can't put its eggs in one basket. It can't just depend on Northern Alliance. It can't just depend on the Taliban. It needs to work with both so that it can curtail the instability. Because otherwise, the instability present in Afghanistan can easily spill over across the border. And more importantly, United States and Israel could potentially utilize this to further target Iran from the east. And that is the worst case scenario which Iran cannot afford. So now Iran is busy making peace with Taliban while it parallelly engages the Northern Alliance. And that is a very interesting development. Because, see, parallelly, Iran is maintaining a working relationship with Pakistan. Since Iran knows that Pakistan is the only country it can talk to. as Pakistan can act as a mediator between United States and Iran. Iran has been maintaining this working engagement with Pakistan. It's not that Iran trusts Pakistan. In fact, no sane country, no rational actor would ever trust Pakistan. But for Iran, it's a necessity, right? It's an absolute essential requirement so that Pakistan can act as a middleman working between Iran and US. At the same time, Iran is engaging with Afghan Taliban, which today is at conflict with Pakistan. Over the past couple of years, the tensions between Pakistan and Afghan Taliban have escalated over the TTP, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has been sheltered in Afghanistan and has been carrying out major attacks against Pakistan. So Pakistan has launched massive strikes against Afghan territory. It has killed hundreds of civilians in the name of targeting the TTP, and it has made Afghan Taliban furious against Pakistan. So while Pakistan and Afghanistan have now become rivals, arch enemies, Iran has found a way to work with both of them. It's working with Afghan Taliban regime, it's working with Pakistan as well, and it continues to maintain its relations with Northern Alliance. So this development in our own neighborhood, it shows how diplomacy works. The world of diplomacy is not about binaries, it's not zeros and ones, it's not what is right, what is wrong. It's always that gray area, it's always that middle path that countries try to follow to secure their interests. Now, moving on, let's look at some important updates with regard to prelims and mains. On page 12, we have an article related to ecologically sensitive areas or ESAs in the Western Ghats. See, back in 2011, the then UPA government had appointed the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Group, led by famous ecologist Madhav Gadgil, who recently passed away. The Madhav Gadgil committee had submitted a detailed report with regard to conservation protection of the biodiversity hotspot in Western Ghats to protect the Western Ghats from the impact of large scale development that's happening in these states. And it had recommended the establishment of eco sensitive zones or ecologically sensitive areas. Essentially, a buffer zone roughly around 10 kilometers stretching all across the Western Ghats. According to Madhav Gadgil Committee's recommendation, the entire Western Ghats, including the buffer zone, was to be declared as a eco-sensitive area with different zonations like eco-sensitive zone 1, eco-sensitive zone 2, eco-sensitive zone 3, where human activities would be prohibited in some areas, it would be regulated, and it would be tightly monitored in the other areas. In the core areas, there would be a complete prohibition on human activity. So all destructive activities like mining, thermal power plants, quarrying, sand mining, all these projects which are destructive, along with tourism and other damaging human activities would be completely prohibited. Whereas in the other zones, it would be tightly regulated and few activities would be permitted, such as hydropower plants and ecotourism and a few industrial projects. Only they would be allowed. According to Madhav Gadgil Committee's recommendation, if these eco-sensitive zones were notified and set up, it would cover the entire stretch of Western Ghats, which was roughly around 1,29,000 square kilometers. Basically, restricting human activity, developmental activities, agriculture, and even industrial activities across a wide stretch of the Western Ghats. I'm sure you know that 6 states are part of the Western Ghats belt. You have Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. Now, immediately after the Madhav Gadgil Committee's report, it triggered large scale opposition in all these states. From Gujarat to Kerala, from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Goa, everywhere large scale protests broke out. The farmers, industry unions, even the state governments, they all opposed the Madhav Gadgil Committee recommendation because this would cripple the economy of these states. It would have a serious impact on agriculture, development, infrastructure creation, and it would have a devastating impact on the economy of these governments as well. So, following this strong opposition, the government of India established a high level working group under the chairmanship of former ISRO chief K. Kasturi Rangan. The K. Kasturi Rangan committee was asked to review the recommendations of Madhav Gadgil committee. So Kasturi Rangan committee went through the report of Madhav Gadgil committee and finally recommended that only 37% area of the Western Ghats would be designated as ecologically sensitive area. There would be some core zones where industrial activity, agriculture would be completely prohibited. Any destructive activity will be completely prohibited. In other areas, it would be tightly regulated. This was seen as more acceptable. It would provide a balance between environment conservation and developmental objectives. So since then, the struggle has been going on to set up these eco-sensitive areas. The central government has till date issued 7 notifications. Each time it has been withdrawn because of opposition by state governments. Now, finally, the Environment Ministry has brought out the latest notification, the seventh draft notification, and this proposes eco-sensitive areas covering roughly 56,825 square kilometers, which is less than half of what Madhav Gadgil committee had recommended. As per Kasturi Rangan committee's recommendation, the eco-sensitive area would have stretched to around 59,000 square kilometers. So from here, the government has further reduced the coverage of the eco-sensitive areas to just around 56,000 odd square kilometers. And now a committee has been set up in 2022, an expert committee, to identify the exact villages and the boundaries of these eco-sensitive areas. So now the Environment Ministry has published the draft. It has invited suggestions and feedback from state governments and the public. So after 60 days, it will go ahead and try to notify and establish the eco-sensitive areas in Western Ghats. But would it be allowed to happen? That's something we have to wait and watch. Because in the past, all 6 notifications have been withdrawn because of heavy opposition coming from the state governments. Because see, they do have a genuine concern. Such large-scale restrictions could cripple economic activities. So now the seventh notification says in some of the eco-sensitive areas, there will be a complete prohibition on highly destructive activities like mining, sand mining, and quarrying. But in other areas, the developmental activities would be regulated. Even hydro projects will be allowed, but under tight regulation. So will it be accepted by the state governments is something we have to wait and watch. Next, on page 13, there's an article related to India's renewable energy sector, specifically solar power. India has curtailed 8,133 gigawatt hours of solar power in order to protect the security of the power grids. This is an update coming from Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. This highlights a dilemma that India's renewable energy sector is facing currently. See, today we have a large solar installed capacity in the country, around 162 gigawatt installed capacity. But however, the power which is being generated is not being stored, and as a result, it cannot be transmitted. Because see, even the transmission infrastructure is largely missing. So while India has pushed ahead with establishment of solar parks, India has pushed the rooftop solar project as well under the Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar scheme, where the central government has been providing financial assistance for households to set up solar modules on their rooftops. More than 75 lakh applications have been received, and as of now, at least 39.7 lakh households have already set up rooftop solar systems with financial support from the government. So, this is already providing around 14,000 megawatt of installed capacity. Then you have off-grid solar projects and massive industrial scale solar parks that we already have, which takes the total installed capacity to 162 gigawatts. But we are not able to fully utilize it because the transmission infrastructure is missing. Battery storage is missing. So if you were to supply all the power generated, it will overload the grid and the grid is likely to crash. And that is a serious economic and national security risk. So to protect the integrity of the grid and the security and safety of the grid, the producers are being forced to curtail their production, and we are losing around 8,133 gigawatt hours. So this is the gap that India would need to fill right now. Improving the transmission infrastructure to take in the higher power production from solar plants, and more importantly, to store the solar energy produced, because solar power is intermittent, depends on the day hours and the sunlight which is available. So battery storage will help provide a seamless and reliable stream of supply, and improved transmission infrastructure will help distribute the electricity generated and maintain the grid security as well. Instead of wasting this installed capacity, we need to focus immediately on battery storage solutions and improving the transmission networks. Next, a quick update on India's space sector. As India has opened up the space domain for private sector participation and even foreign investments, the space startups in the country have been attracting a lot of capital and investments in the form of angel investors, venture capitalists. They are driving initial rounds of funding, seed funding into the industry, and $200 million of funding has been witnessed in the space industry in just 2025, with more than half of it going to space startups based out of Bengaluru, which firmly establishes Bengaluru as the space capital of India. Not only ISRO is headquartered in Bengaluru, but all the major space startups are based out of here. And obviously, it is attracting most of that capital. So recently, the success of Skyroot Aerospace, which has developed India's first ever private orbital launch vehicle and successfully um, achieved its intended target by launching Vikram 1, India's private space industry has now achieved a very big milestone. It has reached a slightly mature stage, and Skyroot Aerospace has become India's first ever space unicorn with a $1 billion plus valuation. So there is growing interest in the global investor community to drive more investments into the space industry in India that will create plenty of opportunities for research and for product development in the space domain. In the coming years, with regard to commercial space activities, there is a massive opportunity available, a commercial opportunity. And India would like to position itself as a key provider of space services. So it would not just be led by ISRO. ISRO would take the leadership role, and it would be complemented by the private space industry of India. And the investments coming in are a clear sign and an indicator of this. Now, coming to the prelim section, we have three small articles. Let's take a quick look. On page 12, there's an article referring to 13 Indian seafarers being stuck in a Ukrainian port because of the ongoing missile and drone attacks in Black Sea. Both Ukraine and Russia have intensified the drone and missile attacks in Black Sea, and several commercial vessels have been targeted. I'm sure you remember recently we spoke about the Odessa port being struck by a Russian attack, and Ukraine retaliating against Russian ports such as Novorossiysk. So similarly, vessel attacks have been reported in the Black Sea, and key Ukrainian ports have become disabled. And as a result, commercial vessels are stuck and seafarers are also stranded with a direct risk for their life and safety. In this context, you should be familiar with the major Ukrainian ports facing the Black Sea. See, Ukraine has three major ports. One is Pivdeni, that is located over here. Then Odessa, which we have already covered in our previous sessions as well. And the third one, which is currently in news, Chornomorsk. These are the three major Ukrainian ports facing the Black Sea. It has been critical for Ukrainian grain shipments, as Ukraine is a key exporter of food products, right? So please make a note of these three ports of Ukraine in the Black Sea. Next, Japan witnessed a massive earthquake yesterday, a 7.1 magnitude earthquake, which has caused significant damage and heavy trembling of the surface. See, Japan in general is very well prepared to deal with such disasters. It's one of the most disaster resilient country in the world, with extensive investments in disaster preparedness and disaster risk management. Despite this, several buildings have caved, collapsed. In fact, one entire mall has caved in, with hundreds of people trapped and injured inside the mall. So as the rescue efforts are underway, this article, it introduces us to a Japanese system, a disaster management system, which is called the Shindo scale of shaking. On the Shindo scale of shaking, level 7 was registered during the 7.1 magnitude earthquake. Now, what do you mean by the Shindo scale of shaking? This can be a prelims question. Which country has developed it? What is its purpose? It has been developed by the Japan Meteorological Agency seismic intensity scale. Like how Richter scale measures the intensity of an earthquake, the Shindo scale developed by Japan, it's specific to Japan as well. It basically helps you understand the intensity of the shaking of the Earth's surface, which can impact the structural integrity of buildings. So there are 7 levels in this particular scale. If a 7 level earthquake is registered, right, it means the shaking is so violent and intense that most of the non reinforced buildings, which are not earthquake resilient, are likely to collapse. So this is an indicator. It's like a early warning system which helps disaster management authorities to accordingly respond. It helps grade the intensity of the earthquake and the shaking, the violent shaking which is being reported. So Shindo scale 0, 2, 3, 4 are low to moderate, but anything 5 and above is quite serious. 7 level shaking of the surface is extremely hazardous as it can easily bring down several buildings which are not reinforced. Coming to the last topic, on page 14, there's an article referring to a Kurdish armed group called the Kurdistan Free Life Party, or PJAK or PJAK. This is an Iranian Kurd group, mainly based out of Iran Iraq region, waging an insurgent war against the Iranian regime from many decades. See, the Kurds are an ethnic minority community found in West Asia region. They are scattered across Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and even parts of Armenia. So Kurds are leading their own armed insurgency to liberate the Kurd areas from these countries, especially from Turkey and Iran. And their goal is to create a separate nation called Kurdistan. So in Turkey, you have Kurdish groups such as the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has recently entered into a deal, a ceasefire deal with the Turkish government. There are similar Kurdish groups in Syria and as well as in the Iran-Iraq belt. Now, recently, United States has used the Kurds as a proxy. For example, while fighting Islamic State in Syria, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, sponsored and funded the Kurdish armed groups in Syria to take on Islamic State. The defeat of ISIS in Syria is largely credited to the efforts of the Kurdish armed groups, funded and sponsored by the CIA of the United States. Now, similarly, with regard to the ongoing Iran conflict, it has been reported that US and Israel were considering the idea to sponsor Kurdish armed groups like PJAK, use them as a proxy to try and topple the Iranian regime. After the top leadership of Iranian regime was neutralized, after the Ayatollah was taken out and senior commanders were eliminated, reportedly US and Israel had a plan to sponsor and fund the PJAK, the Kurdistan Free Life Party, to use them as a proxy to target the Iranian regime. But now the leader of PJAK has said that he has no desire to be a proxy of any country. He has said the Kurds are a proud, independent people. While they fight for their independence, they don't wish to become a puppet of any other regime, or they don't wish to become just a proxy in a larger geopolitical conflict. So please note the name of this armed group and where the Kurds are present and the different Kurdish armed organizations that are operating across this region. So this concludes our discussion for today. If you like the session, do support us with your likes and comments, and do let me know as to what other topics you would like to cover. So with this, let's end the class for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.